Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. My name is Jamie, and I'll be filling in for Aaron as he is on paternity leave after the birth of his son, Carter. Please do share your congratulations in the comments below, as the big baby finally becomes the big daddy. In this video, I'll be working on the Jake Bartok design for the medieval Darksaber. Timely video alongside the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3. You'll see that this design has a lot of inspiration from samurai swords, but also a blade that's very similar to a European falchion. And in this video, we will go through the entire process of post-processing this raw 3D print, getting it nice and smooth, and going through a lot of interesting methods, including traditional Japanese handle wrapping, to very cool lightning patterns inspired by the Darksaber from the show, and some Mandoa writing on the side of the blade, which will make something I think is really incredible. So let's get started. We're going to go through a lot of the processes that we usually do when dealing with 3D printed pieces. First, starting with standard SLA UV photoreactive resin. This coat will allow us to get rid of any of those major layer lines to begin with. I'm just going to do a light coat, hit it with some UV light from this little floodlight, and then make sure that throughout this entire process you're wearing the proper PPE. That includes a respirator and gloves. You do not want this on your skin, and you do not want it in your lungs. So when we're happy that there's a nice thick coat on this, we are going to clean it off with some IPA solution. This just makes sure that there is no more excess resin, that everything is nice and clean, and then it won't gunk up any sandpaper later. Now that's really important to get a nice smooth finish. At this point, we're going to just go through the usual process that we deal with 3D prints, and that is just a combination of Bondo, filler primer, sanding, and repeating until you gradually get like a smoother, more consistent layer on the entire sword. Once we're happy with how that has turned out, we need to put these two pieces of the sword together. Now, this sword blade was printed on our CR30 printer. This allows us to print each half of the blade in one single long piece, which we do sell on the store at galacticarmory.net. And to put them together, we just apply a little bit of glue on either side and hit it with a little bit of activator on the other side. And we want to make sure that this aligns well with the reinforcing rod that we will later put in. And so what I did is just put in the rod, don't permanently put it in, and then attach the two sides together and pull out the rod before there's any chance that that will get permanently attached by excess super glue. Once you have the two sides of the sword put together and you're happy with how it's aligned, you want to make sure that the seam line gets coated with a layer of filler. You want to make sure that there is no more seam between these two pieces. We just use a little Bondo, go around the edge, wait for that to dry, which will likely cause a little bit of shrinkage. You'll see the gaps between the two pieces, and just apply it again until you are satisfied that there is enough built up. Keep following the same process we've been going through this entire time. Sand it away, add filler, and when you are happy with how it looks, we always like to make sure we hit any of our armor or metal pieces with a final wet sanding, and that is using just 800 grit sandpaper, very, very, very fine sandpaper, and a little bit of water, and we will just basically polish the sword. You will see it reflect the light, and you know you're getting towards the end. So what we are now ready to do is prime and paint all of these pieces. With the sword itself, I wanted to go for a real dark, almost obsidian jet black, using Montana Gold's black for the entire blade, and then using just a Rust-Oleum black primer for the handle, which will create a nice variation in tone that you'll see across the final product. All right, let's get to those details. So we're going to start off with applying a little bit of a dry brush to this handle, and that will make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit more metal, and it will make it look like an aged relic like the Darksaber should be. What I'm just going to do is a quick dry brush using a makeup brush, and some Goldfinger, which is an equivalent to Robin Buff or any other wax-based metal product. I'm just going to hit the corners, the highest edges, and just anywhere that it looks like there would be natural wear. And this is where we get to maybe the most interesting element of this entire build. Now, this wouldn't be a Japanese samurai sword inspired build without adding proper samurai sword wrapping. We are going to attempt to make a tsukamaki, which is the handle wrapping technique typically used in samurai swords. Now, this is a approximation of it. I can't say that I am a master or even a real beginner in this ancient art, but I'm going to use some of the techniques that I've learned to replicate it. First, and most strangely, we are going to use stingray leather. Now, the stingray leather, because it is covered in little calcium nodes, is smooth but with a grippy texture. And now we're going to use 2 stencils to cut out strips the length of the handle. And given that this skin is covered in these calcium nodes, it's actually quite difficult to cut normally. So we're just going to use some tin snips to break through these nodules. And now this material is really weird to work with. It almost feels like pop rocks, which is pretty grim description, I have to say. But once it is cut out, test the fit, and then you can just apply it with some standard super glue and activator. And then you have this grippy layer added to the surface. Now it is time to start doing the traditional wrapping style used in tsukamaki. Now, we are going to use a material called a sugeo, which is almost like paracord, which can compress and stretch really well, but is extremely durable. And using techniques that we learned online, we're going to start wrapping this blade from the very top all the way to the bottom by twisting it twice over itself and wrapping it around to the other side to repeat, whilst the other side will be wrapped twice and layer over itself. This will create that almost triangle cutout that you see along the length of samurai sword handles. And through that, you will see the stingray leather, which will create both a really interesting visual, but also variances in the grip and texture of the handle itself. Now, this is a really difficult process. It took me a lot of attempts to feel like I even got it right. And even by beginner standards, this is not a good attempt. But I think I got it to somewhere with a lot of poking and prodding that I'm actually satisfied with. So we'll finish off the tsukamaki by just hammering it down, just gently, just pushing and prodding the sugeo into place, moving it around. Very little of this is actually tacked into place with any glue, and that'll just allow us to get the right distance between each wrap and show the right amount of stingray leather below. We do not want to cover that up. And as you see here, once everything is looking right, it really stands out. We're getting different shades and different finishes of black that really makes something visually striking, even though it is the same color repeated again and again. And with that complete, we are ready to go to the blade. So moving on to the blade edge, we want to make it look like it could actually be sharp, even if it is just plastic. So to get that effect, we're going to tape off all the area that isn't the cutting edge, and we want to start creating a gradient. We're going to start doing this by getting just a standard black and gradually adding more grays and then eventually whites. Spraying this entire edge first with a gray tone to create a difference to the rest of the blade, and then towards the edge we're going to gradually add more whites and more grays up until the brightest point just on the sharpest edge. We want to create some tonal variation, create some interest, and it'll also benefit the lightning patterns that will come directly after this. And once that's complete, we're able to peel off masking tape and see the real difference between the original Montana Gold black color and the airbrushing that we added later. It almost looks as though the light is being caught on the edge of this blade no matter which direction it's pointed, and it creates a really cool effect. So we're going to start the process of creating the foundation for the lightning. Now we're going to do this by getting our airbrush and making sure that we're getting really good flow from this. We don't want any sputters, we don't want any clumps. And once we're satisfied with how the airbrush is behaving, that's when we start creating the glow effect that will eventually encapsulate the areas that the lightning will form on the surface. So we just get some premium white in this case and really take our time. We start to imagine where we want the lightning to be because this is the start of it. And we'll start creating the forks that will eventually be our lightning. We also want to create some smaller areas and some areas with a lot less white pigment just to create some after effects of a lightning strike. And this will become a lot more obvious later as we start building up layers and layers of this white, getting more intense into the middle and creating a great difference from the glow effect that we're adding. And you can see here that we started adding these jagged lines and making the lightning pattern start to come through that glow. We build that up bit by bit, and then it's time to really truly define it. And now we do that by just getting a really small detail brush, in this case used for miniatures, and get a really good flow with that same white paint. The brighter the better. We start following the design that we've already airbrushed on with a really, really thin line, creating jagged effects, almost a little bit random, but all in straight lines that will go from the top to the cutting edge of this blade, following the patterns that we've made. To make it look like this pattern is real and less something that is drawn on, we also want to create the idea of after images that lightning had previously flicked across this blade and has died down, and we're just getting the after images. Now, in those areas that we applied our white airbrush to, but with a lot less pigment, that's when we want to start adding the white mixed with a little bit of a black and just gradually tone down that color and do the exact same pattern. We want to create that lightning effect, but in different shades across the whole blade. And that will make it look like lightning is constantly forming across the blade and dying down, leaving just after images. It'll create a fantastic effect when you cross it over the really bright white lightning effects too, which will both create depth, but will also make it look like you're just viewing a snapshot of something that's a lot more alive and active. And once that's done, just to create the proper effect, every time the lightning breaks off into two different strands, you just want to hit those exact points with a little bit of a brighter paint. With the white strands, you want to make sure that it's just hit with pure white pigment, and that will make it look like it's really forking off and a lot of energy is coming out of it. I think this effect works so well and it is so striking from any distance. Pun not intended. Alright, let's finish up this blade with the Mandoa that is written on the side. Now, Mandoa is the language of the Mandalorians, and in proper Mandalorian fashion, it reads strength, honor, loyalty, and death. Now, as grim as that is, we thought it'd be even cooler that if read on the other side of the blade, since you're reading from left to right, it would actually be inverted. So, on one side of the blade, it also reads death, loyalty, honor, and strength. And we just think that's really cool. Now, the way we work with this is we get a vague idea of how far along the blade we want this to look. And then we divide this space up by how many letters there are and spaces. Now, in total, we got, I think, 32 spaces that we need to put on this blade. And then we divide that up using just some pinstriping tape, some really, really thin 1mm pinstriping tape. And now, given that this is a black blade, I just used a white coloring pencil, which is one of my favorite methods of marking out on dark grays or blacks. And I just simply write out the script, cleaning up a little bit as I go. And then I just use that same super bright white paint from the lightning effects and just draw over it, cleaning up every little bit with just standard black paint, really taking your time. But honestly, Mandoa is a little bit scratchy, a little bit rough looking, so any inconsistencies across the blade actually just add to the effect and accuracy. After you've taken all of that time to get all the Mandoa written out in both the coloring pencil and then in paint, you can take off all of that masking tape and then just use standard rubber eraser and erase all of the white pencil, which will really clean up the final result. After all of that hard work, you want to make sure that it is sealed and not just going to get scratched off as soon as you put it on display. We just use a matte clear coat, or you can use any clear coat that you want to finish this off. And with that, we are ready to put this together. We have this steel rod that we just used for the core. We put that in the blade first, using a lot of super glue, putting that down the blade, and then hitting it with some activator, reinforcing it as much as possible just to get a hard, instant bond, and then start adding all of the handle pieces and capping it off right at the end. And there we have it, the finished Jake Bartok inspired Darksaber sword. This was really one of my favorite builds to date. I really loved working on this sword, and I've learned so many new techniques and worked with so many new materials that I would never have had the chance to try otherwise, particularly stingray leather. I cannot recommend enough that you try this build out for yourself. And if you want to, you can get these files or a DIY kit for yourself at galacticarmory.net, and we have plenty more of these Star Wars inspired swords on the way. So make sure to subscribe to follow along with our next tutorial. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you learned some new techniques, and as always, I hope to see you again in the next video.